Okay, folks, my name is John DeBenedictis. I'm the Executive Director of the National Soccer Coaches Association of Canada. And welcome to another webinar today with our guest Ian Barker. And our host is going to be Adrian Field, who is replacing Valeria Rocca, who unfortunately could not make it today. So Adrian, take over and let's have a great webinar.
Thanks so much, John, and hello and welcome, everyone. Pleased to be with you on another edition of NSCAC Behind the Bench. Today, I find myself really excited because we have a fantastic guest in Mr. Ian Barker. Ian, welcome to the series. We're really thrilled to have you. Just to kick things off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Ian? I know that you have been involved with the United Soccer Coaches. You were the former director of coach education there. My apologies. And now working continually with the U.S. Soccer as an educator developer. Welcome again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's a real honor to be invited. And I was very happy to take up the invite from John. So long story short, I came to the U.S. immediately upon graduation of the university. So I played university soccer. And I took a badge when I was a student in England. When I came to America in 1987, I was more interested in playing than coaching, but coaching was a better opportunity to pay a bill. So I coached at NCAA Division I level at the University of Wisconsin. I then became the youth director for the state of Minnesota. From there, and some D3 college coaching. And then I was the director of education for the NSCAA, which is now United Soccer Coaches. And that is where I made more of the connection with Canada through Tony Waiters and some of the initiatives with your association and the American version or the US version. And then I stepped away from that position about 4 years ago. And currently I serve as an educator developer for US Soccer's education program. I do work with the international and U.S. Olympic committees in coach mentorship as a contract worker. And the badge I'm wearing is our Olympic development program. And so I still direct the Olympic development program for U.S. youth soccer in the Midwest. So it's coaching, became an educator, and now the educator developer.
Yeah, and it sounds so simple when you say it, but the amount of impact that you've had, the number of players that have moved through, the systems, how much they've evolved over the years. I mean, it's probably staggering and tremendous, right? I mean, when you first started in Wisconsin, I think there's a very own Jesse March, right, who's now leading our national team. He's also from Wisconsin. Did you interact with him much?
Yeah, so I know Jesse might get word of this interview, so I'm mindful because I would consider Jesse a friend and somebody I have very, very high respect for. But he was a 15-year-old in our Olympic development program. And to give you a sense of Jesse's character then, he lived in a town called Racine, and all of the best players were coming out of Milwaukee. So to make the team, that was a big challenge. When we went to regional level, most of the best players then made the regional team from Chicago or from Detroit, and Jesse made the regional team. So he came from a modest environment or a less favored environment and made it all the way through in our Olympic development program, which then got him to Princeton University. But one thing to give you a sense of how Jesse connects, in 2010, I sent him a text to South Africa after they'd just been knocked out of the World Cup. And it was the middle of the morning, and he texted back and just said, "Thank you for the text." So he's a very smart person with human interactions and relationships. So the persona you see on TV is what a professional manager, international manager has to be. But as you and I were talking off air before, the humanity, the personality, he's the complete package.
Yeah, and we've been here at NSCAC, we've been privileged. We hosted him going back a few weeks now. And, somebody with the World Cup essentially on our doorstep, is taking even an hour out of his day to share his knowledge, to connect. I think it really brings to life exactly what you're saying. So on to business then. Again, the World Cup is on our doorstep, and the title that everybody here is signed on for is around how World Cups lead to innovations in the game? Now, big topic, tons we can cover. When I think about World Cups, my earliest memories going back in childhood, I can imagine Italy against Brazil, Roberto Baggio, and it's just so formative, right? It feels like every 4 years, the universe, if you will, comes together and really sort of unites around the beautiful game, right? And as soccer fans here in Canada, in the US, all over, we definitely share that emotion. We share that passion. That's why we're on the call today. So why don't we start with some of the innovations that surround technology, right? Because even now, when I talk about the old days, thinking about growing up, watching it on a cable TV, even now down to the streaming services, you can skip through and see exact highlights, goals, expected goals, and all of these different statistics. What really can we expect? Are we at our max? Is there going to be even more emphasis, so technologically, on this World Cup? And how does that sort of shape what's coming in the youth game, in America and Canada?
Sure. Well, before I answer that, when you said Brazil, Italy, you dated yourself by saying 1994, because I immediately went to 1970. So that suggests a generational gap here. I think my first response to the question, and for the benefit of your audience, it was not a prepared question, so I'm off the cuff. I'm in a WhatsApp group, and it's very much what we would say Marmite. You either hate it or love it, VAR. I do not like VAR as a technology and the interruption to the game. However, I believe that because we have the technology, camera angles, replays, etc., and because players will simulate, and because coaches tend to be tough on the media, and the officials can't protect themselves, they're not allowed to come out. I think VAR is here to stay, whether we like it or not. I think we can all agree the Hawkeye goal line technology, which on the watch, that works perfectly. So I think those types of technologies are excellent. When I think about the sports science in general, I don't know what FIFA's rules are in terms of how many people can be on the bench. But if we watch the English Premier League, we actually watch MLS now and other top leagues around the world, the entourages of specialists working with, in addition to health and wellness and physical well-being and trainers and things, but you see all these guys with the laptops or the iPads giving the coach real-time data that he then has to interpret whilst the game is going on. So the modern coach is now blending a lot more input in real time than we ever would have done back in the day. For a grassroots coach in Canada or the US, I'm guessing that the majority of your audience, if they're at grassroots, probably use the VO camera, the ball tracking camera, or they're getting video on an ongoing basis. So unfortunately for a dinosaur like myself, but the younger coaches or coaches now, you need to be nimble in technology at whatever level you are, and providing athletes with visuals of what they have done or moments in the game, as I think we can all agree, is a much more powerful learning tool than using a whiteboard or verbalizing it. So embracing technology, largely video, being able to clip video, manage video, which most of these products are free now, that many of them are free on your laptop, I think is very much part of the modern game.
Would you say it's gone beyond very much a part to even being essential? Like as a coach, coming up through the system, if you put back on your coach developer hat, you think about the coaches who are coming through their badges, a coach who really just wants to write it down. Is there a place for that now, coming up through the system if they want to work in the upper echelons of the game?
I would say yes. And it would be perhaps reflective of my nostalgic, the good old days, or maybe they were just the old days. But I think you could even talk to Jesse, who's a little bit younger than me. We learned to coach from a much more, we had to know the game, interpret the game quickly, visually, likely played the game. And one of the things I'm a little bit scared about with a lot of technology and a lot of the necessary skills around the game is that we will lose the ability of the head coach or the primary coach to use a bit of intuition. You see it all the time now in top leagues. The subs are almost scripted. At the 60th minute, 3 subs are made, and I think as we move with all this new content, we can't throw away the ability for the coach to have a hunch, an intuition, a moment like that. And I think that players, I think those of us that have played, the metrics are interesting. This is how far you ran today. This is how many high performance sprints you did, or high impact sprints. But at the end of the day, I have a sense if it had a good game or not. And I want to see, what was I like in this tackle? What was my positioning like, which video can show me, as opposed to knowing what my heart rate was. I don't always know that some of the data, whilst it's always relevant, if it resonates with the right audience at the right time.
Yeah, it's the age-old argument of, is it a science or is it an art, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that fine balance. And I think sport, at least in my humble opinion, is as close as you can get to poetry in motion. There is an artistic element. There is that subjective element, which I think is what makes it exciting, right? As much as we use data to predict and to analyze, the outcomes are never for certain. And that's what makes the game so unpredictable. And that's what I think draws the masses to it, because if it were a foregone conclusion, I mean, why bother, right? So there is always that unpredictability.
Yeah, and I don't know how many of your audience could tell you how you calculate XG, but we could probably get a whole prediction here of what the scores are going to be in the World Cup games. We don't even need to send the teams. We just know what's going to happen. We know, though, that there will be upsets. We know there will be new players emerge. So all of that data, all of that science informs us. But until you cross the white line and then evaluate the success or less success of the performance over 90 minutes, 100 minutes, 120 minutes. So I think, to your point, it's still an art. It's not a science. There's increasing useful elements of science, but we must keep the integrity of the game and the human component.
Yeah, it's actually a good segue, because you touched on the emergence of new players and new stars. And inevitably, as each World Cup comes and goes, new players come to the fore. I wonder if that will be even more present in the upcoming World Cup, here on home soil, for the simple fact that A, there are more teams that are going to be involved, so there are more players, and B, just the physical load that some of the established stars have had to endure. I mean, we've seen just as recently as yesterday, Arsenal win the Premier League, right? They're one match away as well from winning the Champions League. Almost all of the, in their starting 11 are representing their respective nations in the upcoming World Cup. So they've played, dare I say, 50 games, over the course of the season. We're literally months away from another intensive block. So with that in mind, do you figure that these guys are going to be a little bit tired just with the sheer number of nations, smaller nations as well, that have qualified through the larger circuit? Do you imagine that there will be a higher degree of emergence of new stars, or you think it's going to be status quo?
No, I think this will be a really interesting World Cup for new names to emerge and some established names to disappoint. And when I say disappoint, that won't be really necessarily their fault. It'll just be a reflection of the demand. So to your point, Declan Rice, who is actually Irish but plays for England, I was watching the game against West Ham the other day, which they largely had to win. And I was watching closely, and you could tell it was a very stressful game. They won in the last minutes, but you could tell he was fatigued. And my impression was it wasn't simply the fatigue of a 90-minute game. It was the fatigue of probably game number 58, 59, 60 for him. He will then, fortunately, they've won the league now, so I'm sure Saturday or Sunday will be a little bit easier for him. But then he has to go, to your point, the Champions League final. And then he's got to go straight to England training camp, and he's meant to play the anchor role in our central midfield for England. Whereas an MLS player, a lesser, perhaps currently a lesser talent, might be 25 games into their season. Plus, in the case of MLS or Canadian Premier League or whatever, they're used to the time zones, they're used to the travel, they're used to the climate. So I think players from certain parts of the world in good leagues, but with less miles on their legs, have a great opportunity. And then when you're inviting 48 teams, and we've really filled out with more, I mean, Cape Verde and Curacao, but certainly some of the African countries, there are going to be players. This is their opportunity to showcase. So I think of Jaime Rodriguez for Colombia in 2014. He was a professional football player of a good standard, but he got the golden boot, and now he's in Bayern Munich, Real Madrid. So I think those kind of stories are going to be even more prevalent this year than not.
And they exist in every position.
Yeah.
Emi Martinez from the last World Cup, it jumps to my mind. With this in mind, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about Germany, right? And Germany, strategically, those who know their European football will know that they play with a smaller Premier Division than the rest. They play with 18 instead of 20. And that is strategic in that they're looking to manage the load. Do you think it makes that much of an impact? That little bit of rest, a few less miles on the legs. Do you think it makes a material difference when it comes to performance time?
Yeah, so I go to Europe because I'm sure a lot of your audience are watching as much European soccer, if not more, than North American soccer. So forgive me if the audience wanted to tap into my less profound knowledge of North American soccer in this regard. But in Europe, a lot of the countries have the winter break. So the players get a meaningful, whatever it is, 2 weeks. In the UK, for example, we don't choose to do that. I was listening to a press release from Arne Slot, Liverpool, the other day, bemoaning the missing 9 players. So when those kind of situations are evaluated, often it's blamed on the load. Sometimes the sport conditioning staff get fired. That is a sad reality of that. But there's no doubt that, and interestingly for your audience, one of the big hot topics right now in a lot of the stuff I've been doing with FIFA and US Soccer and the Olympic group is around sleep, the importance of sleep, meaningful sleep. And I did some opportunity with a Premier League club in the UK. And one of the things they're most precious about is the sleep of their athletes, because a lot of their athletes are young guys with children. And so their sleep is horribly disrupted by their family situation, or perhaps lifestyle choices and things like that. So rest, managed, planned rest recovery, periodized rest and recovery around the season. And what this World Cup from start to finish will be 38 days. That's a long time to keep young men sequestered in hotels and ask them to perform. So it'll be interesting. There will be some players that break down. There's no doubt.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. But still, I can't wait to see it, right? And what that looks like, right? So, so thinking about tactical trends now, right? Moving on. Inevitably, every single World Cup, there's a winner, and the winner influences the style, not just at the national team levels, not just at the club team levels, but even down to the youth levels, to the coaches that are coming up, U13 and below. Are we right to do that? Do you think what we see in the non-professional community mirroring what they see as success at the highest levels of the game? From a coach development, from a player development point of view, is that the correct approach to take?
Yes, no, it depends. So I'm mindful of 2008, 2010 World Cup, 2012 Euros, when everybody wanted to play like Barcelona, with good reason, because it was beautiful. And they won 2 European championships and a World Cup. However, most of us did not have Xavi, Iniesta, Busquets, David Villa. And most of us don't come from a Catalonian or certainly Spanish culture. So it's great that a coach in Ontario or a coach in Minnesota admired and respected Barcelona, but trying to replicate that in a youth environment, I would question the logic. What I do think the World Cup does, though, is provide all of us, and especially with some good commentary and then hopefully a good conversation over a cup of coffee or a beer with colleagues, is new trends, new things that we like. So I think of, 3-man midfields, a single pivot, a double pivot. these kind of like small innovations, and now we're seeing a little bit more back three that becomes a back five, that becomes a 3-4-3. So shapes and formations, and I think those are interesting. But prior to prior to the call and being invited by John, I wrote down a note. In US soccer, we had an acronym a number of years ago. It was SAID, SAID, specific adaptation to the imposed demand. So now the grassroots coach watching the World Cup, critically, to maybe steal a few things back into his or her environment, should consider the demands of your environment. Do you train them 2 or 3 times a week? What is your climate like? What is the physical demographic of your kids? Even potentially the socioeconomic attitude of your kids. So look at it, observe it. But if then the club director in your club comes to you and watches your training and you're trying to play like Barcelona, you have to be able to justify that. Not just I saw it on television, it was really attractive, but I think I can train this into this group of 15-year-old boys and girls twice a week for 3 months and have a result. So I would say it's an invaluable opportunity, but it can be misunderstood sometimes.
Just to dig down a little bit deeper on that, so often, at least when I think of the trends, they seem to be in possession trends. And for the coaches on the call right now, I'm just curious as to your opinion on the out of possession trends. Do they ever catch on? Does everyone ever watch and think, my goodness, their defense is so rigid and so solid that we're going to adapt our game model to defend like them for the rest of the campaign? Or is it the more sexy inverted fullbacks, what we do in possession to yield goals? Like, does the defensive side ever receive the same innovations on a global scale?
I think they're harder to see as an overall style. But I'll keep some of your older guests or older attendees. So Franco Baresi, the AC Milan Italian, the guy who could play in front of the back four. So he was kind of a sweeper that could play in back. You go back as far as Beckenbauer, the libero, who then carried the ball from the back in.
Yeah.
You look at Cannavaro, who was the smallest player on the field, but was the best centre back in the World Cup. You do look at how Romero, Lisandro Martinez, and then the goalkeeper, Emi Martinez, how they came out of the World Cup as megastars because of their incredible defensive efficiency. And then Premier League right now, the stifling defense, the back four, the goalkeeper, but then how the midfield that Arteta runs. So for those of us that have been around a long time, I would say that we're probably as enthused, if not more enthused, about seeing midfield and defensive innovation than we are about the latest attacking trend. So it's really what catches your eye.
Yeah, no, it's a very valid point. And something I've noticed also, and maybe you can share some comments on it, is it seems almost a little bit cyclical. And what I mean by that is I now see, sort of harken back, the long throw. And that's something that didn't exist for a long time. We were in the sort of rut of short corners, everything very quick and moving. Now we're kind of loading the box, getting the ball in there, almost a return to direct football, right? Which was sort of moved away in that sort of 2008, 2010 period that you described earlier. Do you think it comes and goes kind of like fashion? Or can you provide some commentary? Yeah.
No, I very much know what you think. And I think some of us were very concerned when we started passing balls across the back, the top of the 6-yard box on goal kicks. You can appreciate when you see it, and you see it done well by excellent proponents of it, like let's say Paris Saint-Germain or Man City in their pomp, that it's beautiful soccer. It makes a ton of sense because you're retaining possession, you're building, you're drawing the opponent in, you're going beyond them. However, there are times, I think, to the UK League Cup final, Carabao Cup final this year, that Man City beat Arsenal in. Both goals were long shots, one from Joku and one from Gonzalez, which is very at odds with the way you think about Man City breaking people down and basically walking the ball into the goal. So I think even even the people that love the tiki-taka, that they're starting to see there needs to be some pragmatic play too. One of the things that I struggle with is the way we're currently officiating, the way people are allowed to run picks. Defenders are able to not look at the opponent because they can wrestle each other. So a lot of these long throws and some of this more direct play is just being put into a scrum. If the officials were equipped with better rules in that area, it might look a little bit different. But I think to your broader point, the game is cyclical. You and I could have this conversation if we're around and invited to in 10 years, and we'd be talking about something different. The reintroduction of the sweeper, right?
Right.
One of the things I'm kind of excited by, the players that I'm looking forward to seeing in the World Cup are true wingers, people that drive to the byline. I feel like over the last decade, 15 years maybe, we didn't have wingers as much. It was a lot of converted midfielders, or it was very narrow. So when I see a player like Madueke or Savinho, trying to think of other wingers, Chiesa before he got injured, but I think that's going to be a new thing that we're going to say, oh, they get to the byline and cross now. Not everything is crossed from 30 yards upfield. So yeah, it'll be cyclical for sure.
Maybe it has something to do with the reintroduction of the center forward, right? I mean, we've seen what Haaland has done with Norway. Obviously, what he does every week at City, but what he's done at Norway and even at a national level. And I think there was this sort of opinion that we don't need center forwards, that they've become redundant and false nines and all the rest. But now, with wingers, the introduction of a center forward also, it's going to make the game a lot more open, a lot more interesting. I think at the end of the day, from a fanatical level, we love offense, we love goals, right? We love excitement, right? And I think that's what draws the neutrals to the game, right? So as far as I'm concerned, long may it continue.
Yeah, more space in the final third, attacking teams creating more space because of very strong defensive organization. And to your point about number nines, he struggled at the beginning, but the Gyökeres player for Arsenal has really come on and has become an integral part because he's an outlet for them. He can hold the play up and bring in the gifted, the Odegaards and the Sakas and these players. So I think a team that goes to the World Cup without effective nines will struggle, not because we all need a striker, but because an effective nine who can play by himself creates incredible opportunity for midfielders and wide players to have more space.
Yeah. So going back to my earlier question about, youth coaches in America and Canada sort of mirroring what they've seen at the highest level, and maybe flip that question on its head a little bit and think, if we think about the future winner of the World Cup, so many club teams at the Premier League, at the Bundesliga, and Ligue 1, they also will copycat. Is it, share some opinion on if you think that's wise and a good way to success?
Yeah, it's a really interesting kind of innovation. So we have examples recently of managers who have lost their jobs because their attitude is, this is the way we do it and we're always going to do it. But I think of Postecoglou, who was the Australian guy who was at Celtic and Spurs. But his innovation, I thought it was kind of, to him, the fullbacks pinching in and going into the midfield. And now you start to see that more, and you see Guardiola doing it with Nico O'Reilly. So I find that a really interesting, pretty significant tactical change, the way that fullbacks are deployed. But then what you really need is fullbacks that perhaps aren't, and I think Trent Alexander could fall into this category. Maybe then they're not as strong at what their primary task used to be, which was defending and marking the back post, and now they're converted midfielders. So again, in the same vein as one of the previous responses, look at your player personnel relative to your level. What could they reasonably do? So could you take your fullback as a U15 provincial team in Canada and ask him to go into, in this case, go into the center of midfield? If the answer is yes, now you have to train it, because just telling the player to do it 20 minutes into the first half is kind of nonsensical. I'm really interested personally in the World Cup. Three center backs, and what you do with the wing backs, if you will, or is it for some of the lower teams? Is it really just parking the bus with 5 defenders? But I think what we'll see is youth coaches, grassroots coaches moving out of this World Cup into the next couple of years. We'll start seeing intentionality with the 3 primary backs as opposed to the more traditional 4. So there's one innovation that I think grassroots youth coaches will take and will be able to make sense of based on the examples they get from this World Cup and other games.
Yeah, and I think coaches, on the call, maybe when we open the Q&A in a few minutes, they can chime in as well. But I just think there's so much more focus and so much more attention on tactical innovations, tactical detail. I think that, recent examples in the professional game have shown how effective they can be. I mean, the math doesn't quite math when you think about, the Paris Saint-Germain, right? And, they had Messi, Mbappe, Neymar. They've trimmed those 3 players, innovated some tactic, made some tactical tweaks. I don't know about innovation. And there you go. You go and win a Champions League, and they're competing for a second one back to back, right? So I think that coaches in general are just hyper aware and fixated on what is happening tactically, that a few centimeters really can make a difference, right, in terms of what we're trying to achieve as a team. So it is fascinating, right? And I think it's something that in football, soccer, there's so many ways to get success, right? And you've highlighted so many of them, right? I know before we move to the Q&A section, I know you have a bit of an opinion on the number 6. So just sticking on this point of tactical detail for the benefit of our guests today, number 6 is a quarterback and not as a destroyer. Can you provide some commentary?
Yeah. So in the counterattack game, particularly, one of the arguments currently is that if I'm in more of a defensive posture and I'm seeking a counterattack, if the ball starts with my 6 fairly deep and he or is a traditional kind of destroyer, more of a Casado, let's say, or Makaleli back in the day, we can't transition quick enough because of the limitations of that player. So there is an argument that somewhere deeper lying in the midfield, especially if you're in more of a counterattack, you put more of your, what we would sort of understand a number 10, because then he can more quickly kickstart the opportunity and get it going. So now you start looking at it seems like there's going to be a lot of 3-man midfields in the World Cup. Are they set up as a deep player with 2 high? Are they set up with 2 deep, maybe a destroyer and this kind of quarterback role, and then a runner? Or are they a little bit more what I see with Arsenal sometimes is you've sort of got a box-to-box with Declan Rice. You've got maybe a Zubimendi or somebody that holds, and then you've got a more creative player like an Odegaard. So I think that engine room of the team and how teams deploy it is probably, for a lot of us that are experienced, not necessarily any better or worse, but just have seen more games, or a relative novice, is kind of put your attention into the center of the park and see the numerical matchups and where the key players are placed relative to the game model. And where I really see the deeper lying 10 is in more of a counterattacking style. Famously, Pirlo at the end of his career, after he came from Italy and then came to North America, that was kind of a role he had, but it was a lot to do with his imposed physical limitations as an older player. But I think we're going to have some really highly talented players playing a lot deeper as part of a game model.
Your thoughts on the inverted fullback in that role relative to an out-and-out 6?
So the challenge with the inverted fullback, from my perspective, is I feel like if I was to play that way, I would want to play with 3 centre backs, and I would want to make sure that at least one of them was left-footed, assuming that I'm going to let both my fullbacks go, or they can go equally, because inevitably, and we've seen it with players like Trent Alexander, and we've seen it with Nico O'Reilly at Man City, if they go and you're caught in transition, that's a big gap. And so I'm comfortable with the notion of pulling fullbacks, a traditional fullback, into the midfield if he is capable of it. but I'm kind of very conservative in my coaching at times. So I want to make sure that the hole that he vacates can be addressed.
Ian, I really want to commend you just for getting into the nitty gritty and the tactical detail. I know that John has taken some polls and received some feedback around tactical detail, and this is really the meat of what people want to hear, right? So
Sure.
Kudos to you for rolling up the sleeves and getting into the detail. One more on this, if I may. In terms of attacking strategy, in terms of what you may anticipate from the teams in the World Cup, do you see them relying more on transition as a means of attack, or do you see them relying more on possession statistics, on keeping the ball more?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you for asking it. I will speak to my country of my birth. One of the things that I know the England national setup considers is who they play in their pre-tournament games, to sort of replicate potentially what they're going to see in the tournament. The challenge for the top countries is, especially with 48 teams, the top countries might have a relatively straightforward 3 group games, certainly more straightforward than previous because it's diluted.
Yeah.
So now you've got to play and you've got to work out how to break down most typically packed defenses, right? And then you end up playing in the round of 16 or the round of 8 a country which is at least your caliber, and now you've got to go the other way. Some countries can't do that very well, and I would say that historically England has been the victim of that in big tournaments. We either can be dogged and resilient against a good team, but we can't break down the lesser opponent if they pack in. So I think that's a problem. If you have the kind of talent that we talked about with Spain in 8, 10, 12, and you have a commitment to a national style, we're going to play this way regardless, then you live or die by your primary tactic. But what most countries have to do is have to have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C. And we're all geniuses in hindsight, right? So it may be that these managers have really got those plans, but then it gets thrown out at the time. But I'm concerned that we'll have some, with such a big tournament and with the climate and the length of the tournament and the time zones and the distances, I'm very concerned that we'll have some very one-way games, and that the better nations, by the time they get to the round of 16, 8, will not have been blooded well enough to be ready for that level of competition.
Yeah, well, I mean, your comments sort of spark a thought in me around Canada's own national team, right? And a commitment to an identity. And I've heard Jesse, obviously I'm not privy to the inner workings of his backroom staff, but I've heard him speak a few times publicly, and from seeing the team play, they seem wedded and committed to a transition style, right? Sort of born out of that Red Bull methodology, high energy, very athletic, covering lots of distance. And I'm not sure, when I think about Spain on one end of the spectrum, as you mentioned, for sure, they're going to look to be dominant in possession, as they always are. Canada is really on the other side of that. And I think that we do it quite well, right? And, maybe some of our players, maybe it's wishful thinking a little bit, but some of our players that are playing a few less games than some of the other nations, might stand a very good chance of stinging some teams. Penny, for your thoughts on Canada's model and chances?
If we let's for now agree on your thesis that it's going to be a little bit more counter-attack transition. Yeah. The challenge becomes what happens if the opponent doesn't come onto you. So Qatar, I'm not quite sure what their style will be, but if Qatar decides they need to draw against Canada and sits in, and Jesse's got to really get the team front foot, break them down, and that isn't within the comfort level of the coach or the team or the composition of the team. And that's where, I mean, it won't get this ridiculous, but 2 teams that don't expect to be particularly effective in possession both park the bus, and the ball's just left in the center circle and nobody wants it. So I think we can all, we know that first world football countries at the top echelon and those close to getting in there, or certainly host nations that have a lot going for them, they're going to have the plan A's and plan B's and C's. But by the same token, we know that there's going to be a preference, right? We know that we know what England would like to do, and we know that they'll do it most of the time until they run into France, and then it's going to be problematic, or Argentina, it's going to be problematic.
So you say problematic, I say interesting.
Yeah. Well, you can ask Thomas Tuchel, Jesse Marsch, Pochettino, Deschamps whether they think it's interesting or a problem.
All right, John, you have your next invite list for NSCAC Behind the Bench webinars, okay? With that in mind, Ian, I'm going to open up the floor to Q&A because I'm sure there's some burning questions from the group. If not, I know I have quite a few more myself. But John, did you want to facilitate the Q&A? Does anyone want to raise their hand, or let me have a look at the Q&A, see if anyone has popped in a question there?
I've seen a few thumbs ups ready or hands up, so I'm sure we're going to get some Q&A. So do it now.
Well, the first one here, it's come in, Ian, is what do you think about the 30-minute break in games for World Cup 2026 instead of the classical 15?
I'm a big proponent of hydration breaks and anything that can be in the best interest of the athlete and consequently performance too. So we'll get a better product. There's probably TV rights and somebody's making money on it and things like that. But if ultimately is to look after the athletes, sustain them through a long tournament in very challenging climate, I'm a huge proponent of it. I will say I was really fascinated the last couple of years seeing the breaks in the games in the Premier League for Ramadan and Muslim players. But those types of innovations, I don't think they detract from the fan experience very much, and I think they're in the best interest of athletes. So I'm for them.
Yeah, well, I mean, just the simple customer in me says that if we're paying that much money for tickets, it lengthens the experience a little bit, right? So more bang for your metaphorical buck.
So you'll be paying a lot more for that extra beer or that extra cup of coffee at halftime too.
Exactly. No, it'd be interesting to see if something like that, works well if it cascades to the rest of the game, right? We talk about trends and it being a trendsetter of the World Cup. So perhaps that's something we see in domestic leagues in the future.
Post-COVID, the extra more players able to sub into games.
Yeah.
In the UK now, games tend to go 95, 100 minutes. So if FIFA sets the officiating standards like that, these games are going to go 100 minutes in regulation plus the break. So, if they decide to go the other way and go back to the more traditional sort of a minute or two of it. So all of these things weigh in, and the officiating is a huge component because the officiating is kind of proportional representation through the confederations at the beginning. The best referees get there in the end, but it'll be interesting to see if there's consistency with officiating or it's very hit or miss.
Yeah, definitely. John, questions over to you, my man.
I don't see any more coming in just yet.
What about yourself?
Myself? I think you mentioned before about the impact of grassroots down the road. Maybe you might want to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah. So when you called me and asked me to come on and we were going to talk about the World Cup, Adrian's done a great job of covering a ton. But for this to be useful for the majority of our audience, including myself, we go back and we coach youth kids at good levels, but it's kids we see 2 or 3 times a week. So I believe there are lessons that we can learn from perhaps the way managers manage their substitutions, when they deploy players, who they take out, how they look after them, in-game tactical changes. So based on being 1-0 down or 1-0 up, we take a player from this part of the field and we put him there. And a lot of us, well, we'll all get help from the commentary if we get good commentary too, which is always a big if sometimes. But I do think a youth coach that goes in to observe the game with a little bit of a plan on what he or she would like to get out of it can be really helpful. I'm sure both of you can relate that the more you coach, you sometimes don't enjoy the games as much because you're looking at things a little bit more critically than when you were just a pure fan. But I think there's a wonderful opportunity here. And of course, you can record the games and there'll be highlights and YouTube and all kinds of things. But either the grassroots coach comes into it looking with some intentionality about things he or she could steal, or they get some guidance from the club director, or they sit with somebody more experienced. And then again, back to my central thesis with this is know your context. Know that you have a 6-month period of time with the kids. You train them twice a week and you play every Saturday. Or you're going to enter a tournament, which is a typical North American US tournament, which is sort of 5 games in 2.5 days, which is insane. But we do that. So, but just don't come out of the World Cup and write a book about playing soccer like France, or playing soccer like Barcelona, or playing soccer like the Canadian national team, because you're not going to be able to do it unless you can replicate pretty much those exact circumstances. So that being the case, put it into your context. That would be my big message or challenge to your audience.
Yeah, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground. We haven't spoken too much about the United States, our near and dear neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on their upcoming tournament experience? I know just from the media that they've recently been in a little bit of dip of form, but hoping to pick that back up headed into the tournament.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for the question. It's something I've been thinking about for a very long time, probably 15 years or so. And I think it's a challenge that Canada will be facing very, very soon, if not, they're already starting to feel it. It might be the toughest international job in the world, because you have players in your domestic league, which is getting better, and half the country wants to pull from the domestic league. And then a lot of your star players are playing in Europe and a couple in Mexico. So, and coaches like Berhalter suffered this, and Pochettino will suffer it. Well, the team is too US based, or it's too European based. The team is too South Central American inspired in its play, or it's too Northern European inspired in its play. You also have the chance that you probably can't evaluate your players and get them together with the same degree of frequency that managers in European managers can, or South American managers. So I think they're the hardest jobs in football to some extent, because you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. As much as a country like the US would love to have the Michael Jordan of soccer, or the Patrick Mahomes or whatever, Pulisic is a very fine player. Tyler Adams, I think, is a very fine player. Winston McKinney, Tim Ream at the end of his career, and a lot of the young guys that many of us have not even heard about, but they're coming out through the academies in the MLS. I think America, the US national team, is the most effective. And I think back to Bruce Arena's time as the manager, when it is a collective, a spirit, and it's less based on individual stardom, which we currently don't have in the same degree as France or England or Germany, or certainly, well, not Germany so much, but Spain. So if Pulisic is fit and comes in and is a senior leader, but not the team built around him, and it's built on some of the qualities of hard work, hard running, commitment to the cause, very nationalistic in their approach, and perhaps some lesser egos, because they're not the top players in the world, so they're a little bit hungrier to perform, so their agents can get them better gigs in other leagues. I think the US could do quite well. I mean, I know the US will be disappointed with anything less than the quarterfinals. That is a pretty lofty bar for most countries. So yeah, we'll see. But I think there's more to be optimistic about if I was a US fan than not.
So, final question for me, Ian, just around what can we do? I mean, as the backbone of the youth development circuit in Canada and the US, how can we best capitalize on this moment? A moment that for many of us has been a lifetime in the making, and God knows when it's going to come back to our shores again, right? So how can we, as coaches, managers, administrators, everyone involved in the daily operation of the beautiful game in North America, how can we make the most of this World Cup experience?
So our number one job the type of person you're defining is to provide safe spaces for the kids, right? So let's assume we've got safe spaces. The next thing, above technical competence and tactical knowledge, is a love of the game. So I'm thinking of some of the fixtures. There's a fixture in Kansas City where I used to live. It's Ecuador Curacao. Couldn't tell you one player that's going to be in the game, but it could be a cracking game. It could be a 5-4, right? It could be the best game of the World Cup. So get my nephews or my team over to the house or to a restaurant with the parents. Don't say, oh, it's only Curacao and Ecuador, because it might be better than Holland versus England in the final analysis. Maybe learn a little bit about the game yourself, share it with the players. Maybe there's some sort of soccer bingo, find a player you like, tell me why. And it's a 38-day tournament. So you can give the kids a day off here and there, but use the World Cup as an inspiration. And maybe that's watching some of the crazy thing the crowds do and some of the halftime stuff, but learn to love it in the same way that those of us of my generation, coming from cultures where we didn't have as many distractions and other activities we could do. So you kind of love soccer by default initially, but you loved it. That's what a grassroots coach should be doing. He or she should be asking the kids, did you see the game today? If you didn't, okay, here's 3 more games this week. Make sure you see one and come back and tell me about it. Or let's try and do, we saw a bicycle kick or we saw a fancy move or a set play. Let's see if we can do it in training. That's what kids need, because then you'll have more kids in Canada playing and more kids in the US playing. And the more tends to mean that we'll have a stronger, deeper pyramid of quality in the end.
I love that. Just foster a love of the game, right? And yeah, definitely, that's a real strong message, and thank you for that.
If I can step in there for a second on that, Adrian.
Of course.
What you said there, Ian, you hit home. Obviously, if you've followed some of my comments on Soccer Journal, but Canada played a game against was it Tunisia, and I was shocked that this last game in Toronto before the World Cup wasn't packed.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not half the audience, but 25% were cheering for the other team.
Mm-hmm.
Tickets were actually very reasonably priced, $36, I think, which is quite good for a national team. And you got players from Juventus, you got players from La Liga, and all over the world. Our players are playing, and yet we couldn't fill that stadium. And then I would talk to coaches after the fact, and we had a practice or we had a game, or there weren't any games at that time because it was still early April or March. And just to what you said, like, give the kids a break, give them a practice off, bring them together to watch a game. I think that you hit the nail on the head with that. And I just wanted to reiterate that sometimes the coaches, we gotta stop. Give kids a break. Take a game, not a game because the league is the league, but give them cancel a training session. Let's watch a game.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to appeal to a coach and the mums and dads, and you said to them, when you were 14, do you remember the backpack you were given for Christmas, or do you remember a particular experience? I think most of us treasure experiences over material things.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether it's the cost of a ticket is prohibitive or there's some logistical issues, but I think we would all agree that providing an experience, so you take if young kids have gone to this game and there was something about it, a particular player or something, those are things you remember for a long, long time. And one of the things we do to fight for our sport, as the lacrosse people do and the hockey people do, is we fight for attention and we fight for connection. And so the best way to get connected to the game is to watch it and talk about it, to hopefully play it, and certainly see it live over seeing it exclusively on television if you can. Yeah.
Fantastic way to close. I want to truly thank you again on behalf of the NSCAC. Ian, it's been a real pleasure giving you an opportunity to share some insights. And I know me, for one, has taken a lot from this discussion. So a very warm thank you, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, Adrian. I really appreciate you. John, thank you for the invite. I'm very humbled. Appreciate it.
Thanks, yeah.